right off the bat. I mean, this is so cool. A lot of people have a misunderstanding with like growling. It's actually you got to do it real gentle. Otherwise, it's you actually don't get the right sound. In addition to it not being very healthy, so you got to use very little air. And so what she does here is really smart. High notes take less air as well. So she's doing some, some techniques together that take very little air but sound remarkably different. And then she goes for a run, right? She's not out for a jog. Okay. This I'm prepared for. So this is the Bernoulli effect. You see how they kind of come together? They do that because it's the Bernoulli effect. So let's talk about what does that mean? Okay, it means that as air goes through the glottis, the vocal folds will come together as a result. This is not the only thing involved, but this is a very important part of it. So if you use a ton of air, right? We're going to give it 3 arrows. That's how much air you're going to use. If you give it a ton of air, what's going to happen is that your folds are going to come in real thick. That's not what we want. From belting, from growling, her folds are actually quite thin, right? So they're thin, which makes them easier to move. So in one phrase, we have growl, we have high note, and then we have a run, all of which take very little air, and for the most part, thin folds. The belts were great. The folds are fat when you belt, but they still take a little air. Yeah, we'll get to that. I'm sure she's going to have more belts, and I'll talk about that when we get there. So let's talk about the proximity effect. You already pre-recorded it, just like those cooking shows do with food. No. See? It's like pre-cooked vocals. No. So what's the change here? Let's talk about what this is first. This is a spectrogram, okay? Let me get this for a second. This is a spectrogram. The y-axis is frequencies from, low to high. And then the x-axis is time. And then the volume of the frequency is shown by how bright that frequency is. So I didn't change anything. I just got closer to the mic, right? So we do see that there is an increase in volume in the higher frequencies, but I'm right up on this thing over here. The biggest change is in the extreme brightness of this and all of these frequencies right here. The changes here, otherwise, are negligible, and you have to keep in mind, I have 2 compressors on this microphone, okay? So the dynamic range is squashed entirely, and I still get the effect that I'm looking for, which is the proximity effect, which means I get a more lush voice, I get bigger lows as I get closer, right? And so I can do things like that, which is weird. But unlike me, Morissette does it for a specific purpose. So all of this is to say that she is using the pull away to adjust for the fact that she's belting, right? Makes sense, right? Let's get a little further on here. As she goes down into the low, she's like eating the mic. Makes sense, right? That's great too, because it's further evening the volume, right? Belts are loud, pulls back. Low end, generally not so loud, unless you're like a bass or like something crazy, right? Something has crazy low end. She doesn't have crazy low end. Most, people who are singing high and doing all those sorts of gymnastics generally have thinner folds. They're not going to produce lower frequencies, but with mic technique, you can compensate for that, right? So it's just like a little interesting note. And Mariah does this all the time. Mariah's super, super good at this. I said it in my last video. Morissette is her own singer. Her tone is very distinct. But we can look at other singers for the same highlight reel. Anyway, let's move on. I appreciate that this hasn't been dubbed to death. The fidelity is always going to be a little compromised in a live situation because you're using a dynamic microphone instead of like a condenser, which is usually what vocalists use in a recording almost always. But then on top of that, like you have all these other things to account for. So what we're hearing here, we're not getting a lot of crystally bright frequencies, which is usually what we associate with like really, really fine singing. It's like very shimmery. And in the recording studio, people go out of their way to bring that. They literally will EQ those frequencies up. So what we're hearing here, it is a lack of that, but it's not because she's not it's not because she's doing anything wrong. It's just kind of the recording environment, which is nice. I'm glad it's not dubbed. Thank you. And you see how on bright vowels, affection, right? A little brighter. And on the higher notes, that kind of sparkly comes back. Her vowels and the way she uses her vowels, like Morissette is exceptional when it comes to tone options. I mean, she's really good at this. What she's doing specifically in this instance is just vowels, right? One of the most basic things you can do. Rochelle Farrell is like the goddess of this. But for the most part, everybody kind of throws this in. It's a really big fundamental in singing. Placement, whatever you want to call it. But, vowels can change tone probably more so than anything else, any other factor. So we have a ton of bright vowels there. Watch what she keeps doing. Dramatic, right? You can see that there, right? That's right there. Right there. Let's discuss why that's significant. This is the vocal tract. Okay. It's a little bit big right now. Let me shrink that puppy down a little bit. Boosh. Okay. So the folds. Where are we at? Where are we at? Okay. So this is the thyroid cartilage. Folds are kind of like right here-ish. Okay. If you lower your larynx, right, the sound has more depth. And that's because the vocal tract gets longer, which means that lower frequencies have an opportunity to resonate. Think a trumpet, right? Or a trombone, rather, right? You can do that with your lips. If you retract your lips on a bright vowel, you go from here to shortening the vocal tract to here. Similarly, if you purse your lips, you go from here to here. And just for the Dunning-Krugers, we're gonna show this on the spectrogram. Okay, so this is bright to darker vowels that we're gonna do here. Okay, so we're gonna see a few things, right? We're gonna see that as we go for an ooh with like kind of like a little bit not pursed ooh, right? Very different from an o. Okay. But what we can absolutely see is that it is brightest here. This is the lowest frequency. This is at its brightest. This is the ooh. This is the O. Little high frequencies come back, right? But we highlight higher frequencies in the brighter vowel. This is why using vowels to change tone is something that we can do with speech and singing. If we have an O vowel and we go ah, right, that changes the tone quality. So that is what we're seeing here. And it's neat. It's neat, is what it is. Let's get back to it. That's definitely borrowing. So Mariah does this really, really well, and obviously this is Mariah's tune, right? So she's using mic technique and vowels in combination to adjust for the low end, right? And it's also worth bringing up too that as she traverses the range and does these runs, she is changing vowels in the runs as well to give them a musical arc and a musical shape so that it's not just a bunch of notes, right? Man. So when we have high notes, consonants can actually be quite an obstacle, which is why Joan Sutherland has never sung a consonant in her life. So why I'm pointing this out is if you... Now, let's actually zoom in right here. Watch my throat if I hold a B. Right? The throat tightens up and kind of goes, right? This happens with any consonant where there's a pressure that builds up, right? Anything like that, any voice consonant. So when she goes for higher than the heavens above, watch how she not only backs off on the B, but also uses the aspirate, the H. So what an aspirate is it is the blowing open of the folds, right? The reason why we get this airy texture when we do is because the folds retract. And then air comes out. This is actually really helpful when you are trying to go up higher. The reason being is that if you're singing in your low, now you should be able to do this anyway, but you should be able to do what I'm about to say anyway. If your folds are really thick because you're in the low end and you try to go up, it's not going to go terribly well for you. You're going to have to thin your folds, especially on a leap from low to high. That's quite difficult to have thicker folds and then immediately thin them. There are things you can do to help that, but it's difficult. So what's genius about Mariah's songwriting, which personally, like, yes, Mariah Carey is a great vocalist. I actually like her songwriting and specifically her recordings a lot more than I do the vocal chicanery, as cool as that is. But the reason why this is really smart is higher than the heavens above. You're going to have the aspirate, which separates the folds and then brings them together, which is really helpful. So let's just hear that again because it's so good. It's so good. Right here is what she is doing. Boosh. Boosh. I'm alive, intoxicated. Some of these runs are a little, they're not locked in. And I think it's worth talking about. So what she's doing right here, and again, this is why I think it's really awesome that this isn't dubbed and polished and made perfect. We can talk about some of the things that I'm sure get better over time. She's, what, 21 here? And I've just heard she improves like crazy. But one of the things where she's struggling right now is in her lows. As a higher voice, this actually happens quite a bit with anybody who really prioritizes the high end. You need more air to get the vocal closure and to get the thickness of the folds that you need to achieve a low note. Okay? And she is doing a lot of things to try and work around that problem that she just doesn't have fat folds, fat enough to really do well on the low end. Vocal folds never stop growing, by the way, so this would get easier as she gets older. 21 is quite young. So she makes it breathy because her vocal folds are not really going to come together in a big way. So she's not even going for it, which is smart. She's using kind of a breathy tone here. Smart. So she messes it up a little bit right there. And like, this is a 10-minute performance. She's giving, like, she's done incredible things in this performance, right? So if I'm talking and nitpicking about one thing, like, come on, right? She's human, who cares? People have imperfections all the time, okay? Pavarotti had bad, everybody has moments, right? No one's perfect. So I'm not picking on it. I just want to talk about the mechanics of why it's happening. So she's really trying to get the low sound in there. Belt's great. She growls, which means she has to use very little air, because if she doesn't, the growl kind of actually doesn't really happen because the folds are kind of like this, and then they kind of flop, flop, flop together. And if you put too much sound in there, they're going to kind of not move as freely. And also, it's going to feel very uncomfortable. So she starts with two techniques that involve very, very little air, a belt and a growl. And then we're going to back it up. We're going to back it up. Right? So now she has to go down. Right? She has to go down, and she has to navigate thin folds coming together and fat folds as she goes. And the changing of the pitch is going to be difficult, not because she's a bad musician. If you think a note, your fold's a duct. Literally, it's the coolest thing in the world. The human body is amazing. You think a pitch, fold's a duct. It just does it for you. The problem here is where using air in such a way where she can do these techniques that require very little and then bring it down sequential, bring it down very, very into this like gradient, right? Like where she has to slowly increase how much air she's using based on each note that she hits. Her runs have been flawless for the most part, and we're picking on like one or two notes that are kind of not perfect, right? So, but it's a learning opportunity. It's a learning opportunity. And one thing I can't get enough of is her tone. Her tone is so good. And it's funny because like she makes up for it immediately. So like those are examples of like doing it well, right? So it's such a good learning opportunity, I think. Her belts are unbelievably clean. Holy crap. So this is actually something that is unbelievably difficult. And we actually had a discussion on the channel about specifically like the Trinity, right? Mariah Carey, Celine Dion, and Whitney Houston, who's probably my favorite of those three. But we talked about one of the things, like each has their own thing that they do incredibly well. And this is, it's weird to call like three singers the Trinity. There are so many amazing singers. Like human beings are amazing. There's so many people that are good at this in different genres and different styles. But one of the things that Mariah does particularly well is transitioning. Okay, so the way that the larynx works, there's a lot of different things you can do. Okay, so you can tilt your thyroid cartilage like this, to get a deeper, more classical sound, you can move your cricoid cartilage up to fatten the folds. That's how you belt. You can flip the folds open for falsetto. You can use just enough air so that there's some vocal closure versus not. Like, there's a lot of things you can do. And for the most part, people don't really prioritize doing kind of everything. But Morissette can. And this is actually something very specifically that Mariah is excellent at. And it's different for everybody, right? So that just because you might be influenced by Mariah doesn't mean that it's going to be the same thing. Like, everyone's instrument is unique. So she's really got quite a handle at a young age. 21 is young. And keep in mind, folds are like the nose, they don't stop growing, right? So she hasn't had a lot of time post-puberty, maybe just under 10 years with her instrument, right? So this is a lot of control. It's pretty intense. It's amazing, actually, the way she can transition through everything. And that whistle is pretty damn clean. It's pretty good. Like, it's really good.
Oh, baby, you got me feeling the emotions.
It's not just that it's a whistle. It's a whistle that goes into a run, which is preposterous.
Oh, baby, you got me feeling the emotions.
Her belting is tremendous. I think what we can say is her larynx gymnastics they're certainly fantastic. But her breath is actually unbelievable. We don't actually know much about whistle. There are people who claim they do, but there are no scientific instruments small enough to get inside the larynx when somebody is whistling. At least that's true for right now, unless something has been developed that I don't know about. Quite possible. But for now, we don't actually know what whistle is. We can imagine and surmise that I think we know what the folds do. Is right, there's like this like you would, right? Your folds end up doing that. They end up kind of creating that little precise hole. And I think we do know that is what happens, right? But to do that, again, like when you come together with your folds, it's almost entirely breath. There are things you can do, but breath is a big factor in how much your folds induct. So being able to whistle with this much control takes a preposterous amount of breath control. And then to do that on a run down, I mean, come on. That's actually demented. And what's lovely is that because there was a mistake, or not a mistake, but like an imperfect run on one note, 30 seconds ago, because we know this is real. We know this is real, right? This is Sparta, right? She's just kicking every other singer into the pit. Yeah, I mean, clearly she's prioritized the higher end of her range, right? And the thing is that this particular song goes down quite a few times, right? And again, it's not that she's making good decisions to get around that. Like, you don't listen to Morissette Amon, to hear super good, super great and powerful low notes, right? And again, she's being smart about how she goes about it. But this control on the high end is completely insane. Belting and air belts are so clean and effortless to the point where they sound completely and utterly connected to the rest of her range, which is bonkers. That's really hard to pull off. She's doing runs in belt and then in whistle, because why not? So this is amazing for actually another reason too. This is more gymnastics. This is more gymnastics, and we haven't really covered this yet. I think I talked about covering it a little bit in the beginning of the video. What this is actually it's two things. So with the cricoid cartilage going up, like it's a terrible arrow. With the cricoid cartilage going up like that in its contraction, it goes this way. That's belting. But you can do both at the same time. You can bring the cricoid cartilage back while also tilting the thyroid cartilage, which gives you kind of the best of both worlds. You get the power of a belt, then the epicness that tends to accompany like vibrato. And because the thyroid cartilage is tilting a little bit, you do get a bit of a warmer sound. So she's combining these two things. And that's something a lot of people don't do. A lot of people, when they want to sing, they learn either or. They learn to sing classically, like maybe it's jazz and there's not a lot of belting, or they learn belting because they don't want to go into classical. But really, really good singers do both. Really, really good singers are like, I just love singing. I love the voice. Let's just not filter information. Let's be a sponge. And I wish I was like that earlier, because I had to learn the hard way that that's kind of the best way to do a thing. And I didn't. And I was a curmudgeon for a long time. But anyway. Like that's what that is. The epicness, but also the power, but also the lushness. That's both of them combined. I love this adjustment that she's doing on the fly. That's so good. Her tongue is a little bit back. Not that it's noticeable. It's unbelievably subtle. But like that she adjusts it. It's like like maybe even smaller than a millimeter. Like like the vowel just gets a little bit of brighter at the end of it. And the only reason I'm attuned to that sort of really minimal thing is for the longest time I had a problem with my tongue going back. So like I've listened to dozens upon hundreds of recordings of people moving their tongue back and forth. Anyway, that was like a micro adjustment, and it was really, really, really amazing that she's doing all this stuff on the fly. What? It's so even too. It's not just whistle, whistle, whistle note. It's like musically, it's elegant.
You got me feeling high.
I mean, like, what? What is that? That's absurd. That's absurd. All right, hold on. I need a moment.
Thank you.
That's just like, that's ridiculous. Oh my. Thank you so much for watching. Discord and Twitch is where I'm going to be streaming with audio consistently, especially for singers. So down in the description down below, click away, follow, join, whatever. That's where we're going to be doing a lot of live streaming for singers. I'd love to see you there.